You keep calling it kindness. No, that's not what this is. Kindness is beautiful. Kindness has dignity. Kindness has limits. But you made yourself available at every hour, for every wound, for every broken person who knew exactly how to find you when they were lonely, and exactly how to forget you when they felt whole again. That's why it hurts so much, doesn't it? Because deep down, you were never being loved. You were being used, politely. They didn't respect your heart. They respected your access, your quick replies, your open door, your endless forgiveness, your soft voice, your "it's okay," your "don't worry about it," your habit of staying when you should have walked away. And now you sit there confused, wondering why the people you gave the most to always gave you the least. Because you were never too nice. You were just too available. You know what people like that do? They study you. Not like a scholar studies a book. No. Like hunger studies a door left open. They notice how quickly you answer, how easily you say yes, how your face changes when someone sounds hurt, how you start blaming yourself before anyone even asks you to. And once they learn that, once they learn you will bend just to keep the peace, they stop knocking. They just walk in, into your time, into your thoughts, into your sleep, into your chest. And the cruel part is, you help them do it. You call it patience. You call it loyalty. You call it seeing the good in people. But sometimes that thing you call love is just fear wearing perfume. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear that if you stop giving, you will finally see who never cared. So you keep smiling when you're tired. Keep explaining when they already understood. Keep forgiving what keeps happening on purpose. And every piece of you grows quieter. Listen carefully. People do not always respect the one who gives the most. They respect the one who knows when to close the door. And you left it open so long they started calling your sacrifice normal. And the cruel part is, you knew. Not all at once, not in some dramatic, thunderstruck revelation, no. You knew in tiny little funerals, in the late replies, in the dry tone, in the way they needed you privately but barely honored you publicly. You knew when your absence made them anxious, but your presence never made them grateful. You knew when every conversation somehow circled back to their pain, their chaos, their needs, their hunger, and your heart just adapted again and again and again. Because that's what you do, right? You adjust, you excuse, you translate disrespect into maybe they're just struggling. You turn neglect into patience. You turn scraps into hope. And That is how people slowly teach you to betray yourself with a smile. You started calling self-abandonment loyalty, started calling overgiving love, started calling silence maturity, when really you were just afraid that one honest boundary would make them leave. So you kept the door open, even when they slammed it, even when they vanished, even when they returned with empty hands and familiar lies. And every return felt like proof that maybe this time they saw your worth. But no, it was only proof that they knew the door was still unlocked. Do you understand how heartbreaking that is? To be remembered, not for your depth, not for your soul, not for your truth, but for your availability, for being the safe option, the soft landing, the unpaid therapist, the warm voice at midnight, the person who would still answer after being ignored all day. That isn't love. That is emotional convenience wearing the mask of connection. And the saddest thing, you kept thinking more love would fix it. No, less access would have. Because people rarely stop at the line you never draw. They keep taking. Not always because they're monsters, not always because they hate you, sometimes because your silence teaches them there is no cost. And human beings, they are very quick students when comfort is free. So they learn your patterns. They learn that guilt works on you, that sadness works on you, that distance works on you, that one cold reply can make you overthink for hours, and one tiny bit of warmth can make you forgive what should never have happened in the first place. They learn that all they have to do is disappear long enough for your fear to ripen, and then return softly. And you welcome them back like your heart has forgotten what your chest remembers. That is exhaustion. That is grief. That is what happens when a soul keeps offering mercy to people who only come near when they need shelter from themselves. Listen carefully. The person who only values you when access is easy does not value you. The person who only remembers your tenderness when life bruises them does not love you. The person who keeps you close but never keeps you secure does not deserve your softness. Because softness is sacred. Time is sacred. Attention is sacred. Your presence is not some public building with the lights always on. You were not born to become a waiting room for confused people. You were not created to be emotionally on call for anyone who knows the password to your compassion. And the longer you stay endlessly available, the more invisible your value becomes. Scarcity reveals worth. Silence reveals truth. Distance reveals intentions. Because the ones who care will feel your absence with respect, and the ones who used you will feel it like inconvenience. That difference will save your life. And that is the part nobody teaches you when you're young. They tell you to be kind, to be patient, to forgive, to understand, to stay soft in a hard world. Beautiful advice, beautiful. Until it lands in the hands of people who confuse softness with permission. Because without boundaries, kindness becomes an invitation to interrupt you, to unload on you, to disappear and return whenever it suits them, to treat your peace like something cheap, something renewable, something that will always be there no matter how recklessly they consume it. And every time you let it pass, every time you say, "It's fine," every time you silence that ache in your chest just to keep the connection alive, you send a message. Not with your mouth, with your tolerance. You tell them, "Yes, you may do this again. Yes, I will still be here. Yes, my hurt is quieter than your comfort. Yes, my boundaries can be negotiated by guilt." And then one day you wake up tired in a way sleep cannot fix. Not because you loved too deeply, because you abandoned yourself too often. That's the grief nobody sees. The private humiliation of realizing you were loyal to people who were merely familiar, accessible to people who were never accountable, devoted to people who only ever offered temporary warmth. And temporary warmth is dangerous. It can make a starving heart mistake relief for home. So you cling, not because it is good, not because it is pure, but because inconsistency creates hunger, and hunger makes even crumbs feel holy. But listen, crumbs are still crumbs. Half love is still absence. Occasional tenderness is still instability. And being remembered only in moments of need is still a form of neglect. You cannot keep calling it love when your spirit only exists there in pieces. You cannot keep calling it connection when you are the one carrying all the weight. You cannot keep calling yourself too nice as if this is some charming flaw, when really it is a wound. A wound that says, "Please don't leave, even if staying destroys me." And that wound will keep choosing pain until you finally decide that being needed is not the same as being cherished. And once that truth enters you, really enters you, you will never offer your presence so cheaply again. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The pattern, the timing, the convenient affection, the almost love, the way some people only become gentle when they feel you slipping away. Isn't that insulting? Not that they were incapable of kindness, no. It's that they saved it for emergencies. For the moment, your silence scared them. For the night, your distance made them wonder whether the door had finally closed. For the hour, they felt your warmth pulling back and realized, perhaps a little too late, that they had mistaken your constancy for permanence. And then they come closer. Softer voice, kinder words, sudden depth, sudden effort, sudden confusion about why you changed. But you didn't change. You just stopped bleeding in public. That's what unsettles people. Not your pain, not your exhaustion, not the 1,000 quiet nights you spent trying to make sense of why you were always enough to need, but never enough to protect. What unsettles them is when access begins to disappear, when the instant replies slow down, when the emotional labor dries up, when your availability, that sweet, endless river they drank from without gratitude, suddenly becomes stone. And then Then they finally feel what you felt all along: uncertainty. Not because you became cruel, not because you became cold, not because you turned into something ugly, but because you finally learned that love without limits turns into self-erasure. Do you know how many people ruin themselves trying to be understood by those who were only ever interested in being accommodated? How many beautiful souls waste years translating their worth into smaller, softer, easier shapes, just so they can remain lovable to people who never planned to love them correctly? Too many, far too many. And maybe that is why your chest feels so heavy now. Not only because of what they did, but because some part of you knows you helped them do it. You held the line open. You reopened doors that should have stayed closed. You gave explanations where silence would have protected you. You kept offering grace to people who treated your mercy like a refill. And that realization, it stings. Because now the grief is not just about losing them. It is about meeting the version of yourself who accepted too little, explained too much, waited too long, and called it love because the truth felt unbearable. But the truth is not here to destroy you. It is here to free you. To teach you that your presence was never meant to be constantly available to everyone who knocks with empty hands and urgent feelings. Your presence is sacred. Your softness is sacred. Your listening, your patience, your tenderness, your late-night understanding, sacred. And sacred things are not supposed to be left unattended. So let them call you distant. Let them call you changed. Let them say you are harder to reach now. Good. Some lessons only arrive when your absence becomes louder than your generosity ever was. And the ones who only loved your availability, they will call your self-respect an attitude. Let them. Because people become offended the moment your access is no longer automatic. Isn't that strange? They could ignore your effort, minimize your pain, arrive empty, leave heavy, return when convenient, and somehow, the moment you hesitate, the moment you stop opening the door with trembling loyalty, you become the problem. That is how entitlement sounds when it loses its favorite supply. They do not say, "I took too much." They say, "You changed." They do not say, "I grew comfortable with your patience." They say, "You're cold now." They do not say, "I only called when I needed warmth." They say, "You're acting different." And maybe you are different. Maybe pain finally educated you. Maybe exhaustion finally sharpened your vision. Maybe your heart, that tired, beautiful, overworked heart, finally understood that being endlessly reachable does not make you loving. It makes you easy to consume. And consumed people start disappearing from the inside first. Not dramatically, not all at once, quietly. They laugh, but less. They answer, but slower. They give, but emptier. They stay, but farther away inside themselves. That's what nobody notices. The private vanishing, the silent erosion, the way a person can still show up with a soft voice while their spirit is already kneeling somewhere in the dark, begging for one night of peace. You know that feeling, don't you? When your phone lights up and your chest tightens before your hand even moves. When someone says, "I need you," and instead of feeling loved, you feel tired. When affection no longer feels like warmth, but like responsibility. That is not cruelty. That is not selfishness. That is the body learning what the mind kept denying. Too much of your kindness was being spent on maintenance, maintaining fragile egos, maintaining unstable connections, maintaining people who only treated you gently when they feared losing access to your softness. Listen, you are not required to keep proving your goodness by remaining available to those who have done nothing to protect it. You are not obligated to answer every emotional emergency from people who treat your peace like a public service. You are not here to become a permanent refuge for temporary people. Some doors in your life need locks, not because you are angry, not because you hate anyone, not because you want revenge, but because your soul cannot survive being left open in a storm. And storms are seductive. They knock with urgency. They arrive with pain in their voice, sadness in their eyes, history in their hands. They make you feel cruel for wanting distance. They make you feel guilty for wanting stillness. They make you feel heartless for no longer volunteering your spirit to be torn apart by their chaos. But guilt is a marvelous leash, isn't it? Especially for people who were taught that saying no is a form of betrayal. It is not. Sometimes no is the first honest act of love you have ever offered yourself. And yes, it will feel unnatural at first. You will second guess it. You will want to explain it. You will almost apologize for it. Your tongue will trip, your chest will tighten, your old hunger will whisper, "Just this once." Do not listen. Because every time you betray your limit to keep someone comfortable, you teach your nervous system that your pain is negotiable. And it isn't. Not anymore. Not anymore. There comes a moment, quiet, bitter, almost sacred, when your heart stops asking, "What if they finally understand me?" and starts asking, "Why did I need to be misunderstood this long just to feel needed?" That question changes everything. Because once you ask it honestly, really honestly, you begin to see how much of your love was contaminated by fear. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being called selfish. Fear of becoming hard. Fear that if you stopped giving, stopped soothing, stopped rescuing, stopped making yourself emotionally available at every hour for every ache and every collapse, you would finally discover who was only there for the convenience of your softness. And that discovery terrifies people like you. Not because you are weak, because you are sincere. You mean what you give. You feel what you offer. You do not perform tenderness, you live it. So when someone mishandles that, it doesn't just disappoint you. It rearranges something inside you. It makes you question your instincts, your standards, your worth, your judgment. It makes you sit in silence at strange hours, replaying conversations, searching for the exact sentence, the exact tone, the exact moment where being loving became being available, and being available became being taken for granted. But here is the truth that hurts before it heals. Some people did not misunderstand your value. They recognized it perfectly. That is why they kept coming back. They knew you were patient. They knew you were deep. They knew you would listen past midnight. They knew your heart had that tragic habit of reopening even after being bruised, even after being neglected, even after being reduced to a convenience wrapped in affectionate language. And they counted on that. Maybe not always consciously, maybe not with evil in their smile or cruelty in their voice, but people do not need to be villains to become dangerous to you. Sometimes all they need is access without accountability. That is enough. Enough to drain you, enough to confuse you, enough to teach your heart to survive on irregular warmth like it is something precious. But inconsistency is not depth. It only feels deep when it keeps you starving. And starvation has a way of making almost anything taste like love. That is why you kept returning. Not because you were foolish, not because you were desperate, not because your soul lacked intelligence. Because pain can become familiar, and familiar things begin to feel safe even when they are slowly unmaking you. So now you must learn a harder form of kindness. Not the kindness that over-explains, not the kindness that waits forever, not the kindness that keeps the door unlocked for people who knock with chaos and leave with pieces of you in their hands. A different kind. The kind that says, I love, but I do not leak. I care, but I do not chase. I understand, but I do not surrender myself to be understood. I can be gentle without becoming reachable to everything that wants to feed on gentleness. That kind of kindness will feel colder to those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Let it. Of course they will call it distance. Of course they will call it pride. Of course they will miss the old version of you, the one who folded themselves smaller to keep everyone else comfortable. Bury that version. Not with hatred, not with shame, not with bitterness, with mercy. Because that version of you was trying to survive the only way they knew how. But survival is not the same as peace. And peace, real peace, does not come from being endlessly needed. It comes from no longer abandoning yourself just to remain within reach. So let them knock. Let them wonder. Let them feel for once what it is like to meet a closed gate where there used to be an open field. The right ones will approach with respect. The wrong ones will call you cruel for no longer being convenient. That too is your answer. And once you understand that, really understand it, you stop chasing explanations. You stop begging the careless to describe the wound they left in you, as if clarity from them could somehow restore dignity to you. It never does. Because closure does not always arrive as an apology. Sometimes it arrives as disgust. Disgust at how long you tolerated confusion, at how many times you let your chest tighten and still called it connection, at how often your instincts whispered, "This is draining you," and you answered, "No, I just need to love better." No, you did not need to love better. You needed to stop offering premium access to people with cheap intentions. There is a humiliation in being deeply sincere inside a shallow arrangement. A private kind, a quiet kind. The kind that doesn't scream in public but rots in silence. You start noticing little things. The effort that only appears when you begin to leave. The sudden tenderness when your energy pulls back. The concern that sounds suspiciously like panic the moment your boundaries become real. And for a second, for one dangerous, aching second, it feels like proof. Proof that they care. Proof that you mattered. Proof that maybe, finally, they are seeing your worth. But attention triggered by your withdrawal is not the same as love inspired by your presence. Read that again in your bones. Some people do not miss you. They miss access. They miss influence. They miss the emotional shelter you gave them while asking for almost nothing in return. And that realization can break you, because it forces you to look back at every moment you mistook relief for intimacy. Every late-night message that made you feel chosen when you were only being used as comfort. Every vulnerable confession that fooled you into believing you were trusted deeply, when in truth you were merely available privately. Every return, every "I've been thinking about you," every "I didn't know who else to talk to," every soft voice that arrived exactly on schedule, right when life had become too loud for them, and your heart was still stupid enough, still beautiful enough to answer. That is what hurts, isn't it? Not just that they came back, but that some part of you was always waiting, waiting with explanations, waiting with empathy, waiting with that old ache dressed up as hope. Hope can be noble, but in the wrong place, hope becomes self-harm with a softer name. Because every time you hope without evidence, every time you re-enter what already starved you, every time you call emotional inconsistency a complex kind of love, you move 1 inch further from self-respect and 1 inch closer to emotional dependency. And dependency is treacherous. It disguises itself as devotion, as patience, as depth, as loyalty. But underneath all that poetry, it is fear. Fear that if you stop giving, you disappear. Fear that if you stop answering, you become forgettable. Fear that if you stop making yourself easy to reach, easy to lean on, easy to reopen, then maybe, just maybe, you were never truly important to them at all. Listen, if your importance depends on your constant availability, then it is not importance. It is utility. And utility has no tenderness, no reverence, no true protection. It consumes what is useful and calls that closeness. That is why your spirit feels angry now. Not loud angry, not dramatic angry, ancient angry. The kind that rises when your soul finally realizes it has been left unattended while you were busy tending to everyone else. That anger is not your enemy. It is your boundary returning from exile. And when it returns, people get uncomfortable. They liked you softer when softness required nothing from them. They liked you understanding when understanding meant they never had to grow. They liked you available when availability made accountability optional. But now something is changing. Now your silence is heavier. Now your distance has meaning. Now your warmth is no longer automatic. Now the version of you that answered everything, absorbed everything, forgave everything, is beginning to die. Let it die. Let that exhausted version of you go with tenderness. Because the garden was never the problem. Your heart was not wrong for being generous. Your spirit was not foolish for wanting to heal. Your tenderness was not shameful. Your patience was not ugly. Your mercy was not a mistake. No, the mistake was simpler than that. More painful too. You kept handing sacred things to people who only knew how to handle temporary ones. And sacred things break strangely. Not with one loud crack, not with one final betrayal, not with one dramatic ending that gives you a clean wound and a clear villain. They break in layers, a little every time you silence your intuition. A little every time you smile through disappointment. A little every time you say, "It's okay," while something in your chest quietly folds in on itself. That is how a person disappears. Not by being hated, by being overused. And the world rarely warns you about that kind of danger. It warns you about enemies, about obvious cruelty, about betrayal with sharp teeth and visible malice. But it says very little about the soft erosion caused by people who like you, need you, admire you, lean on you, and still leave you emptier every single time they touch your life. Because some damage does not come from evil. It comes from imbalance, from one person pouring and the other person drinking, from one person holding depth and the other person visiting it only when they are drowning. And maybe that is why your soul has been so confused. Because they were not always cruel. Not always cold, not always careless in obvious ways. Sometimes they were warm, sometimes attentive, sometimes gentle enough to make you doubt your own pain. And that is the most dangerous kind of wound, isn't it? The wound that does not stay ugly long enough for you to leave it. The wound that keeps changing its face. The wound that hurts you on Monday and comforts you on Thursday. The wound that apologizes with softness, but returns with the same hunger. That is not healing. That is a cycle learning your name. And cycles survive on one thing above all else: your willingness to be available after clarity. After the red flags, after the heavy chest, after the sleepless replaying, after the first disappointment, after the second, after the 10th quiet proof that you are being valued inconsistently, still you stayed, still you translated, still you hoped, still you reopened. Not because you were weak, because you were attached to the possibility of being chosen properly by the very hands that kept teaching you otherwise. But possibility is a dangerous drug for a lonely heart. It can make you build a future out of fragments, make you defend what is draining you, make you romanticize delay, confuse confusion for depth, mistake emotional intensity for emotional safety. And emotional intensity is very seductive, isn't it? The highs, the returns, the sudden confessions, the late night tenderness, the heavy eye contact. The feeling that something profound is happening because it hurts so much to hold. But pain is not proof. Longing is not proof. Chemistry is not proof. Being unable to let go is not proof. Consistency is proof. Respect is proof. Peace is proof. Protection is proof. Clarity is proof. And if you have to suffer this much just to feel connected, then what you are holding is not love in its healthy form. It is attachment mixed with grief, hope, memory, and fear. That is why your body has been begging for distance while your heart keeps writing excuses. Your body knows what your craving keeps denying. Some connections do not need more patience. They need less access, less explaining, less immediate response, less emotional labor, less rescuing, less spiritual bleeding for people who only notice your value once your energy starts retreating. And yes, that retreat will feel lonely at first. Because when you stop overgiving, silence grows loud. You begin to see who actually reaches for you with care and who only reached for your convenience. You begin to notice which conversations survive without your effort carrying them. Clean. Not easy, not empty, not painless. Clean. There's a difference. A clean life is not a life without loss. It is a life without constant contamination. No more mixed signals masquerading as mystery. No more emotional emergencies disguised as intimacy. No more people arriving thirsty, calling it love, then leaving the moment your soul asks to be handled with the same care you gave them without being asked. That kind of cleanliness, it feels unfamiliar at first, because chaos has a strange way of becoming home when you've lived in it long enough. You start mistaking peace for boredom, distance for cruelty, boundaries for guilt, silence for abandonment. And that is what makes healing so brutal. Not just that you missed them. You missed the version of yourself that was constantly activated, constantly waiting, constantly decoding, constantly rehearsing conversations that never gave you enough truth to let your body unclench. Your nervous system got addicted to the unfinished sentence, the delayed reply, the almost choice, the partial warmth, the return after distance, the little emotional ration that kept you alive just enough to stay. That is why letting go can feel like withdrawal, not because what you lost was pure, because your body built rituals around the pain, checking, hoping, waiting, explaining, excusing, reopening, repeating. Repetition is a powerful prison. It doesn't need chains, only familiarity. And familiar suffering is still suffering. I know the heart tries to romanticize it. It tries to say, but they knew me, but we had history, but it felt deep, but they came back. But sometimes they were soft, but nobody else saw me like that. Yes, and poison can be sweet too. Sweetness proves nothing. Anybody can be warm when they are lonely. Anybody can sound deep when they are afraid of losing access. Anybody can offer tenderness in small, dramatic doses when they sense the gate is finally starting to close. What matters is what they protect. Do they protect your peace? Do they protect your dignity? Do they protect your trust? Do they protect your softness when they have the power to bruise it? Or do they simply enjoy that you are still reachable after every disappointment? That question hurts because you already know the answer. You knew it in your tired eyes, in your heavy chest, in the way joy kept leaving the room every time their name returned to your screen. You knew it when your first instinct was no longer excitement, it was recovery. Recovery before the conversation, recovery after the conversation, recovery from reading their tone, recovery from hoping they meant more, recovery from pretending their inconsistency did not cut you because you were afraid that naming the wound would force you to leave it. And that is the crossroads, the moment when your soul decides whether it wants familiarity or freedom. Because you cannot have both forever. Freedom will ask you to disappoint people who benefited from your self-neglect. Freedom will ask you to become unrecognizable to those who only felt secure when you were endlessly available. Freedom will ask you to tolerate being misunderstood without rushing to explain yourself back into a prison. That is hard, especially for someone like you. Someone who has spent years trying to make everyone comfortable, trying to make everything make sense, trying to soften the truth so nobody has to feel the consequences of what they did to your heart. But there comes a day when softness must mature, not disappear, not turn bitter, not become cruel, mature into discernment, into self-respect, into holy distance, into the kind of wisdom that no longer mistakes being needed for being loved. You can still be kind and inaccessible, still be compassionate and unavailable, still be generous and guarded, still be warm without leaving the gate wide open for anyone carrying chaos in their hands. That, oddly enough, is when your kindness becomes real. Before that, a lot of it was fear in beautiful clothing. Fear of losing connection, fear of being called mean, fear of being forgotten. From this day forward, do you hear how final that sounds? Not dramatic, not theatrical, not one of those emotional little speeches people make at midnight and betray by morning. No, I mean final in the quiet way winter is final to a dying leaf. In the sacred way a door becomes a wall the moment you stop calling it temporary. Because that is what has kept you trapped, isn't it? The belief that everything painful must still be transitional, that every inconsistency is just a phase, that every wound is secretly a misunderstanding, that if you stay soft long enough, patient long enough, understanding long enough, someone, somewhere, will finally feel ashamed enough to love you correctly. But shame rarely transforms people who have grown comfortable feeding on your availability. It only teaches them new language, softer language, smarter language, more careful timing. That is why words have confused you for so long. The apologies, the confessions, the I miss you, the I've changed, the I didn't realize what I had, the you matter to me, the I was just overwhelmed, the please don't do this. Beautiful sentences. Beautiful enough to make a starving heart kneel. But a starving heart will call anything nourishment if it arrives with warmth. That is why you must become dangerous now. Not cruel, dangerous. Dangerous in the way a healed wound is dangerous to the blade that once had easy access. Dangerous in the way clarity is dangerous to manipulation. Dangerous in the way silence is dangerous to those who relied on your explanations to keep the door half open. Because once you stop explaining, people are forced to face the shape of their actions without your mercy blurring the edges. Once you stop rushing in to soothe every rupture, they are forced to feel what absence actually means. Once you stop making yourself reachable through exhaustion, through disappointment, through inner resistance, they are forced to meet reality without your softness protecting them from it. And many will not like that. Many will call you proud, cold, distant, changed, hard to read, hard to reach, hard to love. Ah, how interesting. You were so easy to love when loving you required nothing. You were so special when your boundaries were decorative. So important when your peace was negotiable. So deep when they could visit your soul without ever bringing one honest brick to help build something stable there. Now suddenly you are difficult? No. You are expensive. And people who were living off borrowed access always panic when the bill arrives. So let them panic. Let them sit with the silence they used to outsource to you. Let them feel the distance they once made you survive. Let them replay your absence the way you replayed their indifference. Let them wonder why your tone changed, why your warmth slowed, why the old entrance no longer opens from the outside. Not because revenge is holy. It isn't. But consequences are. And for too long, you have been the one absorbing all of them. You absorbed the confusion, the delay, the imbalance, the emotional mess, the half-commitment, the private need and public hesitation, the cycle, the returns, the apologies without architecture, the tenderness without consistency, the closeness without safety. You absorbed so much that your own inner world became difficult to hear. That's what overavailability does. It makes other people louder than your instincts, their needs louder than your limits, their emergencies louder than your peace, their loneliness louder than your truth. And once that happens, you no longer live from the center of yourself. You live in reaction. Reaction to messages, reaction to moods, reaction to silence, reaction to crumbs, reaction to the possibility that maybe this time, maybe this version, maybe this return, maybe this softened voice means something more. But more is not a feeling. More is behavior. More is consistency. More is protection. More is being considered before you bleed, not comforted after.